ES Audio.
Hello, I'm Lawrence Delalio. Welcome to my rugby podcast. With the end of the season just weeks away, we've got a special episode for you, and I'm delighted to be joined by Premiership Rugby's Chief Executive, Simon Massie-Taylor, to talk about his plans for the future of the game. And also returning to the podcast, ready to discuss all the weekend's rugby action. It's BT's busiest pundit, my good friend, former Leicester, Lions and England player. It is the legend, of course, that is Ben Kay. Good morning to both of you. Thank you, Simon, for joining us on a bright, sunny morning in West London. How are you, sir?
Yeah, good, thanks very much. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, great pleasure. And Benny, I'm assuming you're at home. You've been broadcasting pretty much every day this week.
It's the light at the end of the tunnel come the end of the season is there, but it's been a busy few weeks, but it's just been so exciting and great that we're going into the last weekend not knowing exactly who's going to be in the playoffs. There's no dead rubbers, so that's just fantastic.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Simon, I know you are stretched for time, so I really appreciate you talking to us. I'll get straight into it. You have obviously come from the RFU, for those who don't know, and you're straight into your role as CEO of Premiership Rugby. You've been in the role since January, I think. No doubt you've arrived with a long-term vision for the game. We obviously saw a fantastic match yesterday at Twickenham, club match between Harlequins and Gloucester. What do you think? What do you see as the immediate priorities for you as CEO from Premiership Rugby? Because as your two podcast colleagues, former directors of one of Leicester Tigers, Benny, and myself of Wasps, there's been a little bit of scepticism, I would reckon, around Premiership Rugby amongst all the owners, and vice versa, I would imagine. So what do you see as the kind of long-term priorities for you as the CEO?
Yeah, so coming into the role in January, my immediate priorities there's three of them really. One of them was, and it's funny how you sort of forget it, but it was to keep the show on the road, actually, because if you remember at that time, we were back in lockdowns, and also we had this major issue in trying to get teams in and out of Europe to play the 2 rounds there. So my immediate priority was making sure that as many of those fixtures happened as possible, with French quarantine and various other things. So that was a hugely disruptive thing for the league and exhausting for the people involved in it. You can imagine the COVID tests and various other things. And so it's great that we're now out of that and we're back fully trading again. So that was a big chapter. And then the other two things were a big review of what we're doing and trying to put a plan in place. I think we had this situation where the clubs were dealing with whatever was in front of their noses and dealing with the huge financial issues that COVID had presented. And so by putting a plan in place and consulting with them and having something to shoot for that was longer term, that was hugely refreshing for them, and I think for Premiership Rugby to actually have something to shoot for. So that's been my main priority. And then the third one was just to improve our distribution. And we were in the middle of one of the best seasons ever, and we needed to get it out there. And so that's why the ITV deal was so important, free-to-air telly and the highlights, to get that back on show, but also to launch a streaming service where we were putting every game out there. So on top of that, and the great work that BT Sport have done, our broadcast numbers are up 20% of our best season ever. So it's we're getting the distribution out there to try and tell the story of this amazing season.
Yeah, and I guess, Ben and I had the pleasure of playing for England. I mean, when England play, we obviously see this massive spike in interest in the game. We're lucky enough to work with ITV as well as BT Sport. And, you're talking about, 8 or 9 million people watching the game. I guess one of the things that we're all kind of a little bit frustrated about is how can we kind of harness, that audience. You get 1 week, you got 8 or 9 million. The following week, the same players in their club jerseys, and that drops off down to maybe, less than 1 million. So I guess the real challenge for us all is how can we kind of harness that support and get them to watch club rugby.
Yeah. I mean, and that's I think our main challenge isn't a product issue at all. I think at the core we've got an absolutely fantastic product. It's competitive. It's got great brands in. It's got great players in. Yeah. At its core, our challenge is promotion. It's a marketing challenge. It's getting it out there. And just in numbers, we've got nearly 10 million rugby fans in the UK, and 9 million of them basically follow and watch England, and you see that when you have the Six Nation games and with the crowds crowds and audiences they get. Now we know about half of those folks are warm to Premiership Rugby, but then when you actually go down the funnel, there's less than 2 million that have intent to get involved with us. Buy a ticket, watch us on BT Sport, etc. And so the challenge is to try and bridge that gap and to get it out. So the whole vision of this plan is to be the beating heart of the English game. So we've got this amazing opportunity that we're week in, week out, and you can guarantee competitive games for rugby fans to watch. And so at its core, it's a promotional challenge. And so that's how we've basically broken down our plan. And when we look at it and when we try and tap into new audiences, when we looked at it, we clearly want to go for a younger demographic, and we sort of split them out into 3 buckets that we're going to shoot for. There's the first is sort of all out entertainment, and so this is actually as we define all out entertainment, and this is probably the youngest demographic. And and actually I saw this yesterday at Twickenham, where actually I don't know if you walked around, but the crowd was young. And it was actually pretty much split 50-50 girls and boys. You had teens and people in their early 20s turning up to this because they liked the big occasion. And so I thought Quinns did a great job there. They put Craig David on and various other things. But that's the type of thing that those people are trying to buy into. The second bucket is the sort of laid back family time group. I'm in this group. Okay, so and with that you need to basically better articulate the sport to people, and so that you can explain it to everyone in the household, and that they get it and they feel safe in that environment. And then the third bucket is the sort of super sport enthusiast who they're after the biggest players and the biggest clashes, and so that's when we really need to pump up those occasions in the season, like yesterday again, but also frankly this whole weekend has been big game occasions. And we've got it in abundance, so it's getting that message out there.
I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I mean, there's no doubt about it. One thing that struck me from yesterday, I met a father and son. The father had a Gloucester shirt on, and the son had a Quinns shirt on. And I said to the dad, I said, "How come your son doesn't support Gloucester like you do?" And he said, "Well, because of Marcus Smith, basically." So he started supporting rugby, this young man, because he watched Marcus Smith. And I think we need to make superstars in the game, and we need to get those superstars out there. I'm sure, and I guess one of the challenges we've got is to work out how we do that. How do we reach out to those 2 other audiences that aren't rugby fans in a way that is connected, and get them watching our sport.
It all boils down to the players, really. They're the stars here. It's not the teams, it's the players. And I've been tripping out this stat, and to illustrate the power of players, our top 5 players on social in aggregate are more than all the clubs and Premiership Rugby combined. So like player power is super important, and they have a voice. But actually, those top 5 players are 75% of a Ben Stokes or a Joe Root, right? Which is a comparable team sport with about the same distribution across.
So where does the responsibility lie then? Does it lie with those players to grow their profile? Does it lie with the club? Does it lie with PRL? Because you're right. Ben Stokes has got 1 million followers plus. Owen Farrell, who is our most celebrated and famous player, has got 300,000.
I think it is a change in mindset, and I think this is part of our challenge and the things we need to focus on. I think within rugby's culture, there's the tall poppy syndrome, sticking your head above the parapet and everything. which I think is changing, and people are showing that they have a voice. I think there is a bit of a change in mindset within the clubs as well, and we've talked a lot about this with the CEO group with all the Premiership clubs. Getting that access that the media need or that the player wants to have. But I think there's also been quite a sort of, and this is common to all sport, there's quite a transactional relationship that a sport has with the players, and I think there's a responsibility on everyone to grow the sport. And I think I saw that definitely with when I was at the RFU and working with the women's team in the Red Roses. And there's sort of two things that drive them, but one of them's a commercial imperative, because actually compared to the boys, they don't earn as much, and so they need to get out there. And then the second thing is a really sort of positive view that they want to grow the sport for the next generation. Yeah. And I think as a result, they probably perform better than the boys when it comes to their profile and getting it out there. So I think that sort of mindset, and it got summed up to me when I first started, and they weren't suggesting I personally do this, but they were talking about Eddie Hearn and boxing, and Eddie Hearn will talk up that fight every week. You know what I mean? He's a promoter, right? Yeah. And I think that I'm not the right personality to be Eddie Hearn, and equally, if just everyone at Premiership Rugby did that, you make a bit of a dent in it. You need the whole ecosystem to be talking things up. There's about 2,000 of us if you include the players and everyone that works in the clubs. And if everyone woke up every day saying, "How am I going to sell rugby?" Yeah. You change the game.
Ben, listen, you played Premiership Rugby for many, many years. There's no doubt that we're lucky enough to work on BT Sport, and BT and formerly Sky have pumped a lot of money into rugby. I think the clubs, I don't know the exact figure of what the TV deal is, but it's pretty sure that from what Simon's saying, that we probably need to ring fence quite a bit of that money at the beginning of the season and actually spend it on marketing, because there's no doubt that the clubs need the money desperately. I understand that, but equally we play against each other for 80 minutes a week, and then the rest of the time we actually need to work together collaboratively to understand how we can grow the game. And I just probably in hindsight a bit concerned that we haven't spent enough money on marketing the actual sport itself. When I say marketing, there's no point BT Sport telling people that you can watch rugby on BT Sport because they're already watching it. This is about reaching out to new audiences. And I guess having played Premiership Rugby, Ben, yourself for many, many years, there's a feeling that maybe the game hasn't grown exponentially in the way that it possibly could and should have done.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, funnily enough, the pandemic, despite the hardship and pain that all the clubs went through, gave everyone an opportunity to say the model we had before was dangerous in terms of the sustainability. So we've had this big pandemic, almost cost a couple of clubs their existence. So we've seen, as a result, reining back of the salary cap and tightening of budgets. And I absolutely agree. The spend on marketing has to be good, but I aside from the broadcast, I work in advertising, and one of the things that we have to get right is not so much just aren't we brilliant? It's removing the barriers to people that are new to getting involved. And there are so many barriers in rugby. Partly, the laws are quite complicated, but that's okay. You look at how many people have got involved with NFL, which is another equally difficult game to grasp all the laws of immediately. But you have to remove some of the, who's playing this weekend? What competition is it this weekend? You have to be able to sell any barriers, because there's so much choice in the world now. The Netflix generation, they can turn on any device and watch whatever they want. You have to make it as easy as possible to consume rugby and to get into rugby. We're not talking about the people that already like rugby or are massive fans. We're talking about new fans to grow the sport. And you have to simplify that for people. And part of that is spending money to show how easy it is, what great a game it is. You have to hang out in the right places to talk to them. There's, as you said, no point putting adverts for it on BT Sport, because people who are going to watch rugby are already there. You need to, and you look at the benefit of the TikTok sponsorship that's happened with the Six Nations, particularly in the women's game, and how much that has grown this year off the back of it. I've spoken to a few of our friends. Martin Corrie I was speaking to, his son, who's a really good rugby player, just got into one of the DPD systems for the academy. He doesn't sit down and watch a whole game on telly. He consumes it on social media, and he watches the clips of it and the exciting bits of it. And that's the key to growing the audience, because he will go and watch the matches, but we just need to be hanging out in the right places and getting the right messaging over that this is a game that everyone wants to consume. And you're right. We need to hero the players and make sure that there's a hook a little bit. I hate the way people have said, rugby should do what Formula One should do, because rugby is a totally different sport to Formula One in terms of the commercials. I mean, we have one race in this country every year. It's very, very different. But what they have done with the Netflix series is give people characters that they can join the ride on. And I've started watching it again, having not watched it for ages, because I want to see those battles between the drivers that I've seen in the Netflix documentary.
Yeah, and to that point, Simon, I mean, my daughter, 24 years of age, Josie, massive Formula One fan, became that overnight because of Drive to Survive. Now sits down and watches qualifying on a Saturday, watches a Grand Prix on a Sunday, and and absolutely loves it. And I suppose that that there's a challenge for us really to get those personalities and players out there. A lot of the professional clubs, maybe during COVID, dispensed of the services of their media officer and their PR team, etc., because they didn't need that. But I mean, there's a feeling from me personally that we used to sort of have a go at football and say the players never said anything interesting. They were always sort of media trained, etc. But I reckon I hear more from the top 3 or 4 football players from every club than I do from the rugby players. And I don't. Are they guilty of keeping their own content for their own channels, or are they just not pushing their players forward? Because those personalities do exist. You know from your role within the England team that the likes of Courtney Laws, Carl Sinclair. I mean, there's so many of them, and we kind of need to hear from them to stimulate the interest of that next generation.
Yeah, 100%. And I think this is where a more coordinated approach and a more liberal attitude around access is key. But also, I think we need to, there's things that we can do to build platforms for them. So Saracen's a good example. They've produced a system that basically has content from the game straight up with all the players' social accounts linked into it, and it's one click away from them putting out content straight away from the game that shows them in action. But it's broader than that, and it's broader messaging. And I do see the value in these types of behind the scenes series or pieces of content. And it was brilliant that off his own back, Benno Barno did Prep to Win. I think that's a great step, and I think that's opened clubs' mindsets around doing further things. I think we're not Formula One. We don't have the Razzmatazz, we don't have the Spice Girls and the yachts and all this type of stuff. But we've got an abundance of characters, as you say, and I think that's our USP. And that's just not just the players or the ex-players. It's the coaches, it's the owners, it's the guys behind the scenes, and it's the fans. And I think that you talk about Formula One fans, and that they're passive just because of the fact that you can only really turn up to one Formula One Grand Prix a year. You've got folks, families, men and women who devote their life to go into rugby games every weekend, like it is with football, and that has a different type of story, and I think people need to hear it. So I'm all up for it. And
Austin's got a yacht, Simon. He reckons if I think you'll only fit like 4 Lego people on it, but
well, listen,
he's got a yacht.
I should just correct myself and say that BT have paid 110 million for a 3-year deal for club rugby, and obviously once they paid Austin and they paid Ken and myself, we need to
margin.
We definitely need to ring fence an enormous amount of that for marketing. Simon, Ben talked about barriers to entry. Obviously, as a former RFU employee, our top players are on international duty for long periods of time. How big a problem do you think the current calendar is? I mean, we had a moment in time during COVID where I thought that all the stakeholders might sit down and find a solution, but we've sort of come out the other side of it. And I'm not sure we're any better off in terms of a global calendar than we were before COVID. But the reality is now in your new role, you know, it is a big issue, isn't it? That the clubs lose their star players for weeks at a time during the Six Nations and autumn internationals. So, you know, we're trying to market the game to a new audience, but we're losing most of its star players.
Yeah, that's the £1 billion question, really, because as things are constructed, you know, with 28 weekends of Gallagher Premiership, 8 weekends of Europe, 12 international games, and trying to give the players a rest, that equation doesn't add up to 52. And so you have to either deal with the cards that are laid, or you have to do something pretty radical. And I think that the challenges for rugby is that, frankly, there is no silver bullet. But the positive thing is that throughout the COVID period, you know, a lot of good progress was made around considering things like this, and it's at all angles here. So whether it's the international game, whether it's the women's game, whether it's the women's club game, whether it's, you know, even things like sevens, but the championship, and there's various different exercises that are all happening that will come to a point probably at the back end of this year where we'll be able to hopefully stand hand in hand and say that, you know, this is the future of rugby, and it won't be a silver bullet, as I say, but hopefully it will be a progressive step towards a better alignment globally.
Yeah. Simon, just in terms of, you've obviously had a role at the RFU as you know, the commercial lead, and then you've come to Premiership Rugby. You will have seen the relationship between the RFU and Premiership Rugby over the years, and at times it's been quite a long way apart. Where does it sit now? Because I guess those two organisations heading in the same direction is vitally important to growing the sport.
The relationship between the RFU and the clubs is in a really good spot, actually, and again, I think COVID was a positive for that. We're the thing that binds us, as you know, but for the benefit of others, is something called the Professional Game Agreement, and that's fundamentally around how England can access England players in the build up to and during the international windows, which has been probably a tough negotiation in the past around various different factors, but it also governs a lot of other stuff that we do together, and I think that's as we gear up to renewing this agreement, which will happen in the next 12 months, we're going to look more broadly than just the access to England players and the structure of the season. We need to fundamentally look at how we market the game together, and that will be a key point. Alignment is key to the point that Lawrence was talking around the opportunity of the international window and how we slingshot those people into the club audiences, but also the community game as well. You know, I think that for the clubs, for the Premiership clubs, a healthy and vibrant community game is so important, because, you know, not only is that your player pipeline, but that's also your pipeline of future fans and families that are turning up. And I think, you know, off the back of COVID, actually the return to the community game has been slow, and you're seeing a number of cancelled games and a volunteer network that you know, which is heavily reliant on a large number of people giving up time. And so I think with that, we need to really work together in this next, you know, couple of cycles. So it's a much more collaborative partnership than perhaps it's ever been.
Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, Ben talked about how exciting the Premiership season has been to date, and it has been. I mean, some phenomenal games, you know, over a long period of time. Just looking ahead to a few weeks' time. We've obviously got the Prem final coming up June the 18th at Twickenham. Still not sure who's going to be there, but I'm sure it'll be a packed house. What plans do you guys have to sort of make that the most special Premiership final it's ever been?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely for a season, I'd agree, this has been one of the best ever. And I think actually, you know, a lot of people have fallen back in love with rugby actually after watching a lot of these club games, and that's been great. And
but they wouldn't have fallen in love watching the international games, that's for sure. But,
well, It's been really interesting, hasn't it? Because I think COVID was a bit of a spotlight on that, wasn't it? Because when you're playing in front of no crowds, you really do watch the sport. Yeah. And I think club rugby came out well out of that. Yeah, last season was a stonker as well, and this season clearly has been fantastic. And it's just boiling up to this, the semi-finals now, where we still don't know who our fourth team's going to be, but all four teams there would draw a massive crowd at Twickenham for a final. So I think that in itself, then you layer on top of the fact that actually, we haven't had a big crowd at Twickenham since 2019. Okay, so that was unbelievably the last time that Twickenham was full because of a Premiership final. And working there, I know how special that day is. Like, it is amazing. Not only just the time of year and it is actually, in the absence of hosting a Rugby World Cup final or a Grand Slam decider, it's one of the few games actually means something. It has that huge jeopardy of there being a winner determined on the day. So that in itself is amazing. And then layered on top of that, and going back to targeting some of those audiences that we talked about, we're going to put on some entertainment. It's not Craig David.
But I mean, I think as much as it pains me to say it, as a former Wasps player, Quins do it brilliantly. I have to say they've owned that kind of Twickenham doubleheader beginning of the season. For them to have the ambition to give it a go twice, firstly with Pete Tong. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of people that came to that game of rugby that had never watched a game of rugby before, and yesterday with Craig David as well. So we probably do need to think outside the box and do things a bit differently, just rather than giving ourselves a pat on the back and thinking that everyone's just coming for the rugby.
Yeah, well, that's it. So, I mean, Ben will be pleased to hear we've got Sophie Spexter's Kitchen Disco that's coming there. We've got The Feeling, we've got Capital Radio DJs and a few other things. But yeah, it's just that surround sound around the day is really important. That's, there's a great vibe at Twickenham as a result of that.
Yeah.
Sophie needs some backing dancers, because me and Lol, we do a very good Right Said Fred tribute.
Yeah, exactly.
And Costin Healy's already shotgunned that. So
yeah. I mean, Ben, you've got obviously many Premiership final memories yourself. You've also, as you say, involved in advertising, outside of rugby. Do you think there is that there are things that we can do that can really change the dynamics of the big sort of showpiece at the end of the season?
Yeah, again, I'll go back to the point on access and part of BT's job doing the final will be making sure that people see other stuff going on rather than just the rugby, which they do anyway. We know that we sort of try and get into all parts of the stadium, be that the West Car Park at Twickenham, but it is that, a big West London event, isn't it? And you do get people turning up. You get the regular rugby fans, as you mentioned before, people in all different shirts. I saw a little bit of stuff on social media from some of the Leicester fans last night saying, "Oh, that's the problem. Premiership Rugby selling the final before we know what teams is in it. There won't be enough tickets for the Leicester fans." Well, the whole point is to create an atmosphere where we're filling the stadium regardless of who's playing, so that it is a fantastic atmosphere. And I think they've done a really good job so far. And yes, you'll get a sudden surge when we know who the finalists are and people are desperate to get there. But in terms of the rugby, for all the purists, has to be front and center, and that has to be the hook to get a lot of people in, or at least to get them in. Once they're in there, we have to make sure they're enjoying the rugby as well. But there are people that, persuading your son or your daughter to come to watch a team they've never sort of had any interaction with. Well, if you can sell the day and the whole turning up to, outside Twickenham's often as good as inside it. Yeah. And you need to make that whole special day out where the rugby's the icing on the cake and they fall in love with the game. People that up until then had no interest in rugby fall in love with the game because they've been to a major event. It's a little bit like anyone who's been to the Olympics, they've probably ended up, because of the ticket situation, watching a sport they might not have ever watched before, but suddenly they've loved that sport because they were part of the Olympics and part of something special. And next time it's on, they'll watch it because they've been drawn into it. And that's the same with what we do with big events like the Premiership Final.
I saw you at the beach volleyball final, Ben. The women's final.
I'd never had any interest before I went to that.
In the Horse Guards parade. So, listen, I know that the final will be hugely entertaining, and we'll be doing another podcast around that, actually, trying to get some views from some of the former players, fans, pundits, administrators of what it's like to try and capture the essence of the final. So that's probably, we'll park it there. Simon, I really appreciate your time. Before you go, I just want to ask you about, we have a sequence in the show called Outstanding, where we raise a glass to a player that we think has been outstanding. A bit like a pint of London Pride. So I'll kick things off. I was at Twickenham yesterday, and I'm gonna give my award to Joe Marchant, who was our choice of man of the match, scored 2 tries. He's a player who was obviously plays all across the back line. I thought he was just absolutely brilliant yesterday. Apart from one Mike Cat moment where he passed the ball into his mate in the stands, he was utterly superb. So he is my outstanding player of the weekend. Simon, I'm assuming it may come from yesterday's game, although as now CEO of Premiership Rugby, you probably watch every single minute of every single game.
Well, my vote was Joe from the game that I was at, but then I came back and I watched the Saint Saracens game, and I think Theo McFarlane's try, which sort of basketball-esque sort of, I think we all want to do that, don't we? But actually, Owen Farrell in that game was just, I think once you're a player that experience, he just ran the show in a lot of bits of that game. So I thought he was brilliant. And actually, I'd also tip, I think Jack Willis's comeback from a career-ending, injury or potentially career-ending injury to now looking like a Test player again. That's an amazing accomplishment in itself. And I think
his I don't know, Ben. You and I have had our fair share of injuries, but documenting everything in a sort of behind-the-scenes documentary. So, Jack obviously did a lot of that. Maybe that was part of his kind of rehabilitation and therapy. Will Evans, who played for Quins yesterday, gone through an enormous amount of rehab, as has so many other players across the league. Could you have imagined yourself documenting anything like that and putting it out there?
Not really, but times have changed, and it is genuinely interesting content, isn't it? And that is something that, it's the lowest moment of people's careers, but there's something really hopeful in all of that. And by doing it, if Jack then goes on to sort of, represent England at the next World Cup, having all that stuff to put together is huge, because that's the behind the scenes things that fans don't realize how much goes into stuff like that. Yeah. So we've been talking about the behind the scenes footage for the Formula One with Drive to Survive. I 100% think that there's something in that, just showing the commitment to get back, if you have a fantastic story at the end of it. But I think there's an element that it keeps you sane posting that stuff while you're doing it. And it's a nice record of what you've done. But 100%, I think there's an opportunity to exploit that, and more of that is fantastic for the game.
So Simon, before you go, and I know you're busy, so you have to shoot off, and we appreciate your time. When we sold the Rugby World Cup, we obviously were looking. We weren't worried about selling England Australia, because that would sell itself, and England Wales at Twickenham. Selling Canada against Romania on a Tuesday evening at 4 p.m. at the King Power Stadium was a bit more of a challenge. So we recognised that actually rugby fans were going to buy tickets to rugby games. So we ended up employing Charles Dance to do our team talk, if you like, and you could have used Idris Elba, you could have used a number of other different people, but it was about reaching out to those to those new audiences and being able to do that. I reckon if we managed to persuade BT to give us a chunk of money from their 110 million, and we got the Owen Farrell in every club, and we gave it to Ben's wonderful little creative agency, I'm pretty sure we could shoot quite a good ad to really sell the game. We might have to put it on TikTok and terrestrial TV, but that's the sort of thing that that I think we need to do to really propel the personalities and superstars that we have into the conscious sort of minds of non-rugby fans.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea, but that's the essence. You know, the strap line of the Rugby World Cup was too big to miss, and I think the message that we're trying to get out there is that we've got unmissable world-class sporting entertainment, and to Ben's point, that it's accessible for all. And our ambition for next season is to make it the most accessible season. And so whether that's the fact that actually more games than ever will be on free-to-air telly, including the final, but to also making every game available through streaming, but then also working together with the clubs for the first time on a collective ticketing plan. And so the clubs are actually going to go on sale for their public ticket sales all on the same date next season, with a collective message along the lines of what you're talking about, Lawrence, around this unmissability.
Yeah. Well, listen, Simon, really appreciate your time. Good luck with the remaining few weeks, and we look forward to a wonderful final on June the 18th. I'm sure. Are we sold out yet, or we still got a few more tickets to sell?
No, we've still got a few more tickets to sell. We're tracking well. In fact, actually, it's the best it's been, but it's this late surge now. So get involved and see you all there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Simon. Appreciate it.
Simon.
Cheers.
So that's it was great to hear from Simon. Benny, I wasn't joking actually. I think if we did have some budget and some access to some really top players from every club, because there are superstars in our game, I think we'd have to sort of think of a pretty creative idea that might sell the game to the great British public.
Absolutely, and look, we mentioned before about the different channels that you might operate in and the different target audiences. You want a sort of convergence approach where you've got dads and mums saying, "Oh, should we go to the rugby this week?" And you've also got kids because they've seen interesting clips saying, "Mum and Dad, can you take me to watch the rugby rather than football or cricket this weekend?" So, look, there's a huge planning part of that I'm sure having someone with the commercial nous and the commercial background of Simon at the top of the tree, it will emerge, and hopefully the Premiership Rugby bandwagon will grow and we'll be putting behind some of the problems of the past.
So Benny, come on, give us your. I know you probably watched every single game this week, or in fact, you probably broadcast every game this week. You are the busiest man on BT Sport. There's no doubt about that. But who was your outstanding player from the weekend? Given that I probably chose your first choice and Simon took away your second choice.
Well, Simon mentioned the guy I'm going to go for, and it's a bit of a cheat in that I think he's been brilliant for the last few weeks. Maybe not quite as prominent this weekend, but the one moment that Simon talked about was Theo McFarlane's slam dunk. International basketball player for Samoa, international rugby player for Samoa, and he's just been the find of the season, certainly the back end of the season for Saracens, and breaking free, keeping the quick backs at bay with his long stride. I think who was it? Was it? I think it was Freeman that was trying to get back to catch him, couldn't get there, and then he almost slowed down at the end to allow him to come back, and then literally rugby's answer to the slam dunk. So I'll go for Theo McFarlane, but also special mention to Matt Proctor for an equally spectacular finish on his try.
Yeah, amazing game that was. And listen, if we move that swiftly on to the weekend's action, you were at my old club Wasps. I think their last home game of the season. They played Sale Sharks. Sale came away with the win. It wasn't the most exciting game. Sale are, a very physical side. Obviously, nasty old injury to Elliot Stook. I did feel that while Sale were always felt like they had the upper hand, you kind of felt that injury sort of took the wind out of Wasps a little bit, and they never really recovered from that moment onwards, and Sale sort of took the win.
Yeah, I agree. Elliot Stook's been one of the unsung heroes for Wasps this year. He's had a couple of clubs and he's always played really, really well. He's more than, I think, because of his size and stature, people think he's a certain type of player, but he's got brilliant skills as well. So it's devastated to see such a serious injury to him, though. Great to see his response this morning or yesterday about the positivity about coming back. So, but I think you're right. It just when the game needed to sort of set light, that we had that big sort of stoppage just after half time. But I think it's just difficult. I think there's a lot of clubs at the moment, back end of the season, who aren't involved in the final push, that sort of mid-tier clubs that, they almost, you can see they almost just want the season to end. And Wasps, I hate to say nice things about your old club, Lol, because we had a few battles, me and you, but they, more than anyone I can ever remember, have suffered with injuries to their most key individuals this season. They're losing the likes of Fekitoa and Launchbury, and we've mentioned Jack Willis as well. And I think Jack Willis was the really, really big one, because that season when you got to the final, it was the Jack Willis season, wasn't it? And people couldn't play him. And so absolutely brilliant to see him back to his best and doing stuff that when you get the sort of injury he had, we wondered whether psychologically and physically you'd be able to get back to being the turnover superstar that he is, and he absolutely has.
Do you know what? I still, when he gets himself in that jackling position, I still wince a little bit, because I know exactly, what it's like to be there. Well, not quite at that level, about that far from the ground, but as you say, it's he's a phenomenal player, and another one yesterday making his comeback to Premiership Rugby was Will Evans at Harlequins. It's great to see him back on the field. Friday night's other game was, of course, Bristol against Exeter. The Bears managed to run in 6 tries to Exeter's 5. Maybe a bit of an end of season sort of game feeling about it. It's been quite a frustrating season for Rob Baxter, hasn't it? I mean, he's sort of given up the ghost really and said that their playoff hopes are kind of all but done. And sort of quite nice to see Bristol Bears finally sort of back to where they were maybe sort of last season and the season before.
Yeah, two coaches that probably have the biggest job this summer, because both of them have been on the upward curve for the last few years. And obviously Rob Baxter, everything that Exeter have achieved is phenomenal for how quickly they became dominant after getting into the Premiership, but he has his biggest challenge now, because once that curve starts to tip over and drop again, it's very easy for the momentum to build up and it to spiral a little bit, as big teams such as Leicester and Wasps have found out. So how do you arrest that will be vital for him. Again, Pat Lam, playing the most attractive rugby last year, topped the Premiership, and then an abysmal season by those standards this year. So there will be question marks, I'm sure, internally about whether the Bristol game plan is, high risk, and you have to then take the downside of that when things start to go wrong, it's very difficult to get it back. It's such, for me, it's a game plan that requires such confidence for everything to flow that it's brilliant while it's working, but it's very, very difficult. So how does he regain that confidence in what they were doing over the summer? But, a little bit like what we were saying before, a couple of those teams will be desperate for the holidays to have finished and get back to work, to making sure that they get that confidence back, because Exeter, Bristol, they were bulletproof at times last year.
Yeah, they were. And I mean, this is how competitive the Premiership is. It's so hard to predict. Bath were playing their last game, I think their last game at home anyway, against London Irish, and they managed to win. I'm pretty sure that at the beginning of the season, when BT Sport asked us to pick out, who they thought might do really, really well, myself, and probably not exclusively myself, picked out Bath as a team that might be challenging in the top 4, because they made the playoffs last year. Yeah. Obviously, things were completely the opposite. It couldn't have been the case. They lost every game until the new year. But I guess it just shows that the fact that they've got the ability to beat London Irish, maybe, just maybe, there is some seeds of hope emerging for the Bath fans for next season.
I think all those teams we've just talked about just shows how rugby is such a psychological game, because the quality of players that Bath have had this season and not been able to deliver with, that you just have to be a couple of percent off, and then it almost becomes self-fulfilling. And I think, for me, that's one of the reasons why having mentally strong players within your team is so important. So just filling yourself full of the stars isn't just the ticket. You look at the effect Owen Farrell has on Saracens, and that sort of winner's mentality, that whatever's happening, we're going to drive to be better and fight for everything. And I think that's key. And I think that's what a lot of directors of rugby will be trying to find. It doesn't have to be in established stars, guys coming out of the academy, just those winners that it's fine when everything's going well, but when times are tough, the people that are going to drag you out of the trenches.
Yeah, listen, I was at the big summer kickoff game at Twickenham. Extraordinary game, really, because Gloucester obviously had to win it. They didn't in the end, but they were 24-7 up. And then Quins, we know how good they are at coming back. I mean, they were, as well as they played in that second half, and Joe Marchant was outstanding. They were kind of gifted the game by Gloucester. So I'm sure the Gloucester fan. It was interesting. I was chatting to George Skivington before the game, and I said, "What's your biggest concern for today?" And he said, "Well, my biggest concern is that none of my players have really played in this atmosphere before. None of my players have been to Twickenham. I haven't got that many internationals in my team. And I think that, for a few of them, it's the first time they've even walked into the stadium. Whereas you look at Quins, and, Quins have got, they've all of their players have played, they're quite regularly this season. They have the double header at the beginning of the season, and a lot of them are used to playing international rugby. So I think that was probably just the difference in the two sides in terms of that, the ability to think under pressure, because it seemed like Gloucester had a bit of a sort of brain freeze in the second half.
Yeah, I think that I really believe that Harlequins, by accident, have developed this mentality which affects the opposition, that because of their performances last year in particular, being able to come back, people are concerned about it. And so, you get to a big lead as Gloucester had, and they're looking over the shoulder. So as soon as they get that first try, subconsciously, all those Gloucester players going, "Oh, here we go." And we often see in rugby, if you get to a big lead at half time, it's really difficult to come back out for the second half and maintain that, because you don't want to make mistakes. So you stop playing a little bit, and that gives them a bit more momentum. And as soon as they start scoring, you panic and don't want to make mistakes even more. So it's become a little block in every team's mind.
No, listen, I couldn't agree more. I mean, there was I don't know if you saw, there was a wonderful try by, as a former second row yourself, Freddie Clark, who made a break, came on a sort of inside line, and showed a great turn of pace. And then he probably should have been my outstanding player with the swan dive alone that he did to score the try. But I mean, none of those Gloucester players picked in Eddie Jones's squad, which is fair enough. But there's still some real stars out there on display. And I was going to say, I'm not sure Rob Fiddler had that in his locker when he was playing second row for Gloucester. Really.
I've been raving about Freddie Clark this year. I think he's been brilliant. I know, we're all having to pick our Premiership teams of the season, and I know at least one of our team have put Freddie Clark in their version of the team, which then goes into a vote. So he's there. He's being talked about in that sort of company. He's been outstanding, and as you said, there's a lot of good talent in that Gloucester team. And although George Skivington will be upset that they're not getting the recognition, another year of being able to build without people leaving on international duty might help Gloucester a little bit.
I was going to say, he won't be that upset, will he? Really? So,
exactly.
Careful what you wish for in terms of that. Now, listen, Northampton didn't quite manage to win over Saracens, but they are still in the top four at the minute, and they've got a final game against Newcastle, your old club. Talking about Premiership teams of the season, I've seen a few of our colleagues at BT Sport have picked some individuals. Not enough Leicester players in there for my liking. I think they've been outstanding this season. They obviously beat Newcastle up at Kingston Park, and I think that goes a long way to showing the culture and the sort of mindset of what Steve Borthwick and co have created there, because they're so far ahead in the top of the table, and they didn't have to win that game, but they've gone up there and done a really professional job.
Yeah, look, the great thing that Steve's done in my mind is just get that clarity of what we're going to work on first when he initially came in.
Yeah.
And we saw the seeds of it last year starting to burst into life. You're building it a little bit like when Saracens first started to get good, was around that kick chase and getting a lot of basics right that meant you were very difficult to play against, and then bolting things onto that. And, you know, Leicester have done that superbly well this year, to the extent where, you know, you've now got two teams in that Leicester squad where people come in and you're not thinking, oh, there's going to be a drop off in performance. And that's not necessarily down to having vastly better players, but it's down to the fact that whenever anyone comes in, they know exactly what the role is, and that makes them difficult. Having said that, you know, we could be talking about Saracens being at the top of the table, had that game at Welford Road at the beginning of the year, which ended in controversy, and Leicester getting the win. So those two teams have been pretty level all season, and both built on similar philosophies of everyone knowing exactly what they're going to do. But you've got a couple of outliers, and you know, we'll see what happens next weekend. But you could potentially have two derbies in the semi-final.
Yeah, I was going to say we've got one more weekend of what Premiership Rugby, and which is taking place obviously the first weekend in June. And as it stands, as you just alluded to there, I think we're looking at potentially an East Midlands semi-final, and also a London sort of semi-final as well, which is very exciting. I mean, do you think that, barring any sort of miracle results, that's the sort of direction of travel?
I think so. You know, Dean Richards' last game in charge, Gloucester fans will be hoping that he can pull something out of the bag against Northampton at Franklin's Gardens. So, but you'd expect getting that second bonus point yesterday for Northampton means that I think, bar anything, it gives them the confidence. Yeah. But you'd expect them to win at home, and that's all they need to do now. You know, so Gloucester will be praying for a miracle. But how the season's gone this year, we might get an outstanding result. So there's still a lot of excitement going into that final round, which is great.
And yeah, it is. And do you think, I mean, given what you said earlier, and I 100% agree with that, is it too difficult to predict or is it too risky to say that it will be a Saracens Leicester final, or do you think we're unfair to write off the likes of Quinns and Saints and maybe one or two others as well?
Well, rightly so. That should be the case because of their form this year, but form doesn't count for anything in knockout rugby. And you know, Harlequins, who we're all sort of talking now about, well, this, you know, great Harlequins team, when they were at this stage last season, no one really thought they were going to win the Premiership. They'd had some comebacks, and you know, they only just got into the playoffs by the skin of their teeth, and then they went on and won the whole thing. So, of course, a fool would sit here and say, you know, the winners are going to come out of Leicester and Saracens, but they've got to be favourites, those two.
Listen, that's all for this episode. Ben, you and I have got a very quiet week, which culminates in the European Challenge Cup final live on BT Sport on Friday night, and also the European Champions Cup final on BT Sport on Saturday, and then maybe a little bit of Monaco Grand Prix on Sunday. So, you know, it's a tough life, but someone's got to do it. Ben, my huge thanks to you, and also to Simon Massie-Taylor for his time earlier on. The podcast will be back in 2 weeks' time, where I will be sounding a lot sharper than I am today, and we'll be discussing the final round of Premiership Rugby. Until then, thanks for listening and goodbye.